You know that feeling, when you look back and the clues were all there? Piled up like dusty boxes in a forgotten corner? Yeah. That's how it was with Mr. Whiskers and the wall. I should have seen it sooner. Really seen it. Not just the old cat being old. But I was wrapped up in my own fog. Thick and gray, like the October sky pressing down on the city that day. October 23rd. Tuesday, I think. Does it matter? The air smelled like damp concrete, decaying leaves, and the faint, greasy tang of distant traffic. My new apartment, if you could call it that, was on the 3rd floor of a building that side. Creaking floorboards, rattling pipes in the walls, the groan of ancient radiators waking reluctantly to the chill. Boxes, half unpacked, leaned against walls like tired sentinels. Most of my life, still packed away. Not out of busyness, but out of a kind of paralysis. The move wasn't adventure. It was escape. Or maybe just running. 3 weeks since Mom passed. Sudden. Cruel. Like a slammed door in a quiet house. The silence afterward was deafening. The house, her house, felt like a museum of absence. Every cushion dented by her shape, every shelf holding dust where her knickknacks had been, the lingering scent of her lavender hand cream, now just a ghost in the hallways. Staying felt like drowning. Leaving felt like betrayal. So I ran to this creaking apartment with its unfamiliar sounds and its view of a brick wall. Brought only what I could bear. The few books, the worn armchair she loved, and Mr. Whiskers. He came with the territory. Mom's territory. 13 years old, a rescued alley cat with a past written on his body. One ear permanently crumpled, like a discarded piece of paper. A nick missing from the tip of his tail. His fur, a patchwork of smoky grays and faded blacks, was thick but uneven, with stubborn mats I could never quite conquer near his haunches. His eyes, the color of tarnished pennies, held a depth that always seemed watchful. Like he'd seen things. Endured things. He wasn't mine, not really. I was just the next person in the chair. The one who filled the food bowl, scooped the litter. In her house, he'd orbit Mom like a quiet, furry moon. Curled on the footstool while she read, head-butting her knee for attention, that low, gravelly purr rumbling like distant thunder when she stroked his head. With me, he tolerated me. A polite distance, maintained with feline precision. That first week in the apartment, he vanished. Not literally, but he became a shadow. He found the darkest corner, behind the bulky, outdated television I hadn't bothered to hook up yet, tucked between a box marked miscellaneous, kitchen, and the cold radiator. A fortress of cardboard and dust bunnies. He'd emerge only for necessities, food, water, the litter box tucked away in the tiny, windowless bathroom. His movements were slow, deliberate, each step seeming to cost him something. The arthritis in his hips. Mom used to fret over it, warmed his food, gave him glucosamine treats he hated. The floor was colder. I'd see him pause, gathering himself, before pushing off again. His gaze, when it occasionally flickered to me, was opaque, unreadable, resigned, angry, just old and tired and displaced. I couldn't tell. I didn't try very hard. My own grief was a heavy coat I couldn't take off, muffling the world, muffling him. The apartment faced north. Little direct sun ever pierced the windows, especially as autumn deepened. The light was perpetually gray, weak, leaching the color from everything. It settled on the faded floral wallpaper in the living room, paper that had probably seen the 70s come and go, peeling slightly at the seams near the ceiling. One wall, the one opposite the windows, always felt darker, colder. Maybe it was just the lack of light, or the way the building leaned, or the memory of cold drafts Mom would complain about in her own old place. Mr. Whiskers avoided that wall. He'd skirt its perimeter, giving it a wide berth, his tail held low, almost tucked, when he passed it on his way to the kitchen or the bathroom fortress. I noticed it, vaguely, the way you notice a draft but don't get up to find its source. Just another quirk, in a cat full of them, in an apartment full of unfamiliar creaks. My days blurred. Work, from the wobbly kitchen table, was a welcome numbness. Emails, spreadsheets, video calls where I plastered on a smile that felt like cracked plaster. Nights were longer. The silence, after the building settled, was immense. I'd sit in Mom's armchair, the only familiar anchor, staring at nothing. Listening to the city hum, a distant siren, the clank of the radiator, and sometimes the soft shuffle of Mr. Whiskers, moving in his dark corner. One night, I heard a different sound, a low, rhythmic scraping. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Fuzz, scritch, scritch. I muted the TV, a documentary about glaciers I wasn't watching. The sound stopped. I waited. Nothing. Probably just him, shifting, maybe scratching an itch against the box. I turned the sound back on, letting the narrator's calm voice fill the hollow space. I didn't investigate. Why would I? It started on a Thursday morning. I remember because it was trash day. The clatter of bins in the alley below woke me earlier than usual. Gray light filtered through the thin curtains. I shuffled into the living room, heading for the coffee maker, my brain still fogged with restless sleep. And I saw him. Mr. Whiskers. Not in his fortress. Not skulking near his food bowl. He was sitting, perfectly still, in the middle of the living room floor. But he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at anything in the room. His entire body, from the crumpled ear to the nicked tail, was oriented rigidly towards that wall. The dark one. The cold one. The one he usually avoided. His head was slightly tilted, his tarnished penny eyes wide, unblinking, fixed on a point about halfway up, where a faint water stain bloomed like a brownish flower on the faded wallpaper. He didn't move, didn't twitch. He was a statue carved from smoke and shadow. The only sign of life was the faintest tremor in his whiskers and the slow, shallow rise and fall of his ribcage beneath his patchy fur. "Hey, buddy." My voice, rough with sleep, sounded too loud in the stillness. Nothing. Not a flicker of an ear. Not a blink. Just that intense, wavering stare. Like the wall held the answer to every question he'd ever had. Or maybe every question I hadn't asked. I poured my coffee, the sound abnormally loud. Drank it standing by the kitchen counter, watching him. He didn't budge. 10 minutes. 15. The apartment felt colder than usual, the gray light somehow heavier. A prickle, unease mixed with a strange, sharp curiosity ran down my spine. This wasn't just old cat weirdness. This felt different, intentional, like a silent alarm only he could hear. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug. He was still there, still staring. As I passed him to head back to the bedroom, to face the numbing glow of my laptop, I paused, kneeled down, slowly, not wanting to startle him. His gaze didn't waver from the wall. Up close, I saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his front paws were planted firmly, almost braced. His pupils, wide and black in the dim light, seemed to drink in the faded wallpaper, the water stain, the peeling seam near the baseboard. I followed his line of sight. Just old paper. Plaster beneath. I assumed. The skeleton of the building. Nothing. Mr. Whiskers? I whispered, reaching out a tentative hand. My fingers hovered inches from his back. He didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge me at all. It was like I wasn't even there. Like the only thing that existed in his entire world was that patch of wall. A profound stillness radiated from him, not peaceful, but charged. Waiting. The air itself felt thick, expectant, holding its breath. The radiator clanked suddenly, making me jump. Mr. Whiskers didn't move a muscle. I stood up, feeling strangely dismissed. Unsettled. I left him there, a small, gray sentinel in the half-light, his entire being focused on a mystery only he could perceive. As I closed the bedroom door, leaving him alone with the wall, I felt the first cold trickle of something unfamiliar cut through the fog of my grief. Not fear, exactly, but a sharp, insistent whisper of wrongness. A quiet shift, not just in the old cat's behavior, but deep in the foundations of this place I'd run to. Something had begun. Something silent and still and utterly, profoundly important. And I, wrapped in my own heavy coat of sadness, had almost missed it. The staring, it became the new rhythm of the apartment. A silent, unsettling metronome. Morning after morning, I'd find him there, rooted to the same spot on the worn rug, facing that wall. His posture never relaxed, always taut, alert. Ears pricked forward, whiskers rigidly forward, those tarnished penny eyes unblinking. He'd stay for hours, motionless, until some internal timer clicked, and he'd slowly, stiffly pad back to his fortress behind the television or to his food bowl. The rest of the apartment, my presence, seemed to fade into irrelevance. His world had shrunk to a rectangle of faded wallpaper and a water stain. My initial unease, that sharp whisper of wrongness, curdled into a low-grade anxiety. Was he sick? Dementia, maybe? I'd heard of that in old cats, staring blankly at walls, disoriented. The thought tightened like a cold band around my chest. Not him too. Not yet. He was my last tangible, breathing link to her. Losing him, especially like this, felt like losing her all over again, in slow motion. Guilt, thick and sour, rose in my throat. Had I brought him here only to confuse him? To make his final days, or months, or years a disorienting purgatory? I'd been so wrapped in my own drowning, I hadn't considered his. So, tentatively, I began to pay attention. Real attention. Not just filling his bowl, scooping his litter, but watching. Seeing him. His routine was sparse. He'd emerge from his fortress around dawn, sometimes with a soft, creaky yawn that showed his worn teeth and pink gums. He'd stretch, gingerly, favoring his stiff back legs, each movement deliberate, careful. Then, the pilgrimage to the staring spot. After his vigil, he'd drink long, slow laps from his water bowl, the sound echoing slightly in the quiet kitchen. His appetite was finicky. He'd sniff his food, the cheap kibble I'd bought without thinking, and often turn away, leaving most of it untouched. I remembered Mum warming his special wet food, mixing in those glucosamine treats he'd grudgingly eat. Another pang of guilt. I bought the expensive wet food the next day, the kind Mom used to get. Chicken pate. I warmed it slightly in the microwave, just a few seconds, like she did. The smell, meaty and rich, filled the small kitchen. I placed the dish near his fortress, not wanting to disturb his staring ritual. Later, when he returned from the wall, he paused by the dish. Sniffed. Deeply. His nostrils flared. He looked at me, just for a second, a flicker of something unreadable in those old eyes. Then he, not ravenously, but steadily, cleaning the dish. A small victory, a tiny spark in the gray. His avoidance of that wall, except for the staring, was absolute. If his path to the kitchen took him near it, he'd padding wide around the perimeter, hugging the furniture. His tail, usually held low, would sink even closer to his haunches, the fur along his spine seeming to lift just slightly. Not aggression, but wariness. Deep, ingrained awareness. What did he sense there? A draft? A smell? Something only feline senses could detect in the old plaster and lathe? I pressed my own hand against the wall one afternoon, while he was asleep in his fortress. It was colder than the others, noticeably so. The wallpaper felt slightly rough, brittle under my fingertips, near the water stain. I leaned my ear close. Silence. Just the usual, distant building hum. Nothing. Yet, he knew something. The nights were the worst. For both of us, I think. That's when the scritching started. Not every night, but often enough. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Fuzz, scritch, scritch. Always, always, coming from the direction of that wall. Not frantic clawing, but a persistent, rhythmic probing. Like someone, or something, testing the surface. Trying to find a way in, or out. I'd lie in bed, my own grief a heavy blanket, listening. The sound would stop the moment I shifted, or held my breath too long. It felt deliberate. Observed. One night, driven by a surge of irrational frustration, I crept silently into the living room, a small flashlight in hand. The room was pitch black, the only light the faint glow from the street lamp filtering through the thin curtains. Mr. Whiskers wasn't in his fortress. He was sitting, a dark silhouette, in his usual staring spot, facing the wall. Utterly still. As my eyes adjusted, I saw his head was tilted, listening. The scritching started again, soft, rhythmic. It seemed to come from behind the water stain. Mr. Whiskers didn't move, didn't react to the sound, but his stillness felt electric. Intensely focused. I flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, landing squarely on him and the patch of wall he faced. He didn't startle, didn't run. He simply slowly turned his head. Those old eyes, reflecting the light like dull coins, locked onto mine. Not scared, not angry, just knowing, accusing, almost. You hear it too, that look seemed to say. You hear it now. The scritching stopped instantly. The silence that followed was thick, charged. I switched off the light, my heart pounding. In the darkness, I heard the soft shuffle of his paws, moving away, back to his corner. I stood there, alone in the dark, the cold from the wall seeping into my bones, feeling like an intruder in my own haunted space. After that night, something shifted. Not dramatically, not instantly, but subtly, like ice beginning to crack under a tentative spring sun. He still spent his hours staring at the wall. But sometimes, in the late afternoons, when the gray light deepened toward dusk, he'd emerge from his trance, stretch, and instead of retreating immediately, he'd wander. He'd investigate the half-unpacked boxes, sniffing at the flaps. He'd sit by the window, watching the pigeons bicker on the opposite roof ledge, his tail tip giving the faintest twitch. One afternoon, I was sitting in Mom's armchair, not working, not reading, just staring into the middle distance, lost in the fog. A wave of grief hit, sharp and sudden, a physical ache behind my ribs. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers against my temples, trying to breathe through it. A soft sound, a shuffle on the rug. I opened my eyes, Mr. Whiskers was there. Not at the wall. Not across the room. He was standing near the foot of the armchair, looking up at me. His gaze wasn't vacant, wasn't fixed on some unseen horror. It was present. Curious? His head tilted slightly, those old eyes studying my face. The tear I hadn't realized had escaped, tracking a cold path down my cheek. He didn't meow. Didn't rub against my legs. He just looked. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his front half, his stiff back legs following with obvious effort, and settled onto the rug. Not touching the chair. Not touching me. But close. Closer than he'd chosen to be since we arrived. He curled his patchy body into a loose comma, his nicked tail tucked around his paws. He didn't purr. He just stayed present, silent, true witness to my unraveling. The simple act of him choosing to be near, in that moment of raw vulnerability, felt like a tiny crack in the ice around my own heart. A fragile, tentative bridge being built over the chasm of our shared displacement, our shared, silent language of loss. The cold wall still loomed, the scritching still haunted the nights, but in that quiet afternoon, with the weak sun fading outside, and an old cat choosing proximity, something thawed. Just a little. Just enough to feel less alone. The fog hadn't lifted, but for a moment, I saw a shape within it. Furry, watchful, and unexpectedly steadfast. He wasn't Mom's moon anymore. He was becoming something else. Something quiet and battered and strangely thin. The fragile truce. The quiet afternoons near the armchair. They didn't erase the wall. They just made the space around it warmer. Less desolate. Mr. Whiskers still spent his mornings, and often long stretches of the afternoon, rooted before that faded rectangle. His posture remained taut, vigilant. But now, sometimes, when he'd eventually break his vigil, he'd pad slowly, stiffly, over to where I sat. Not demanding affection, never that. Just settling nearby. On the rug beside the chair, or sometimes, miraculously, on the worn footstool Mom had loved. He'd curl into that loose comma shape, tucking his nicked tail close. Silent, but his presence, the soft rhythm of his breathing, the faint, dusty scent of his fur, it was a quiet anchor in the drifting fog of my days. I started warming his food, every meal, without fail. Bought the glucosamine treats. He'd eat them now, grudgingly, but he'd eat them. I talked to him thoughtfully while I worked. Nonsense, mostly. About the weather, the idiot pigeons, the never-ending emails. He'd rarely look at me, his gaze often drifting back towards the living room, towards it. But his ears, the crumpled one, would sometimes twitch. Listening. Acknowledging the sound of my voice, a sound that wasn't silence or scratching. The nights were a different country. The scritching persisted. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Scritch, scritch. It wasn't louder, but it felt more insistent. More focused. Always behind that water stain. And Mr. Whiskers, he was always there. A shadow in the dark, sitting sentinel. No longer startled by my presence, but his stillness felt heavier at night, charged with a tension that vibrated in the cold air. One particularly restless night, the sound seemed sharper, closer. Like nails, not claws, deliberately scraping plaster. My skin prickled. Rats? It had to be rats. Old building, damp wall, perfect habitat. The thought was both a relief and a new layer of disgust. I pictured them, scurrying, gnawing behind the thin barrier of paper and plaster. Separated from us, from him, by mere inches. No wonder he stared. No wonder he avoided the wall. His ancient senses attuned to the tiny heartbeats, the rustling, the smell. It explained everything rationally. Coldly, I told myself that. Repeated it like a mantra as I lay rigid in bed, listening to the phantom scrabbling, feeling the chill radiating from that direction even through the closed bedroom door. Rational, but the image wouldn't settle. The deliberateness of the sound, the way it stopped instantly if I made a noise, and the look in Mr. Whisker's eyes, that night with the flashlight, knowing. It didn't feel like vermin. It felt personal. The next morning, fueled by a sleepless night and a jittery resolve, I decided to act. Rational problem requires rational solution. Rats? Call the landlord. Simple. I found Mr. Henderson's number scrawled on a sticky note inside a kitchen drawer. His voice, when he answered, was gravelly, thick with sleep or something stronger. Yellow, I explained, carefully, politely. The scratching in the wall, the cold spot, the old water stain, my concern about pests, or maybe a leak, damp attracting rodents. Silence on the line. Then a low grunt. Which wall? The living room wall. The one facing the alley. It's always cold, and there's this stain. Another grunt. Longer. More thoughtful. That's Mrs. Gable's wall. Mrs. Gable? Next door. 3B. Been there since Methuselah was a pup. That wall, it's shared. Thick, but shared. Her place backs onto yours there. He paused. I heard the flick of a lighter, a long inhale. Had complaints before? Complaints. About the wall. From the other side. No one's complained to me. I just moved in. Huh. Another drag. Well, old building. Settles. Pipes rattle. I sure maybe. I'll send Bob, super, he'll take a look. Sometime next week. Next week? But the scratching, it's every night. Bob's busy. Got a flooded basement in 1C. Next week. He was gone, leaving me with a new piece of the puzzle and a deeper chill. Mrs. Gable's wall. The scratching wasn't in the wall, potentially. It was through it. From next door. Curiosity, that sharp, insistent blade, began to slice through the fog of my grief. Who was Mrs. Gable? An old woman living alone? Had she heard the scratching too? From our side? The thought was absurd, unsettling. I found myself listening differently during the day. Not just for Mr. Whiskers or the building's groans, but for sounds through that wall. Television? Music? Voices? Nothing. Only silence. The heavy, watchful silence. Even the building noises seemed muted near that spot. Like sound itself was absorbed by the cold plaster. Mr. Whisker's intense focus, his wariness, felt suddenly justified. He wasn't staring at rats. He was staring at her, or the space where she existed, just beyond his perception. What did he sense that I couldn't? I started noticing patterns beyond the staring. Mr. Whisker's avoidance of the wall's perimeter became almost ritualistic. He'd pause, ears flattening slightly, before making the wide detour around it. His tail would puff, just a fraction, the fur along his spine lifting. Not fear, exactly, but a profound, deeply ingrained alertness. He'd sniff the baseboard, near where the peeling seam was worst, his nostrils flaring, his head jerking back slightly, as if catching a scent he couldn't place, or didn't like. One afternoon, while he was deep in his trance, I dared to approach the wall myself. Slowly, quietly, I stood beside him, not blocking his view, but close enough to feel the unnatural cold emanating from the surface. I stared at the water stain, the peeling paper. Tried to see what he saw. Feel what he felt. Nothing. Just old wall. But the silence, it pressed in. Thick, expectant. And then a sound. Not scratching. A low, rhythmic thump. Thump, thump, thump. Coming from the other side. Slow. Steady. Like someone deliberately tapping the wall with the heel of their hand. 3 times. Then silence. Mr. Whiskers didn't flinch. Didn't move a muscle. But his ears, pinned flat against his skull now, and the low, almost inaudible growl that vibrated deep in his chest, told me everything. He heard it. He knew it. This wasn't random noise. This was communication. Or provocation. A shiver, colder than the wall's draft, raced down my spine. I took a step back. The moment I moved, Mr. Whiskers finally broke his stare. He turned his head, slowly, deliberately, and looked up at me. Those tarnished penny eyes, wide, unblinking, held a look I'd never seen before. Not fear, not anger, but a fierce, protective intensity. A warning. Stay back. It was a look that mirrored the cold dread pooling in my own stomach. The quiet apartment, the warm afternoons near the armchair, felt like a distant memory. The wall wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a boundary, a line drawn in the cold plaster, and whatever was on the other side had just knocked. Mr. Whiskers, my quiet, battered companion, was standing guard. But against what? The rational explanation, the kindly old neighbor, crumbled. Something was wrong. Deeply unsettling from the shared wall, with its cold silence and deliberate taps, felt less like a partition and more like a lid, holding something back, something that knew we were listening. The fragile piece we'd built, thread by thread, felt suddenly perilously thin. The scratching in the night wasn't the problem. It was just the echo. The real tension, the true unease, was seeping through the cracks in the plaster. From 3B, from Mrs. Gable, and Mr. Whiskers, ears flat, low growl still rumbling, was the only one who seemed to understand the gravity of the sound. The game had changed. The quiet shift in the heart that began with his staring had become a tremor, rattling the foundations of everything. We weren't just observers anymore. We were involved. The thump. It echoed in my bones long after the silence returned, a sound too deliberate, too human to dismiss. Mr. Whiskers' low growl, a vibration felt more than heard, lingered in the cold air like smoke. His warning look, fierce, protective, taunted me. Stay back. But the wall, Mrs. Gable's wall, it wasn't just cold plaster anymore. It was a membrane, separating us from what? An old woman tapping? Or something else? The rational explanations, rats, settling pipes, frayed nerves, dissolved like sugar in hot tea. What remained was a chilling certainty. Something was profoundly wrong next door. And Mr. Whiskers, my quiet, battered sentinel, had known it all along. The fragile peace we'd built, those afternoons near the armchair, evaporated, replaced by a suffocating vigilance. Every creak in the building, every groan of a pipe, made my heart stutter. The nights became an ordeal. The scritching returned, relentless, always behind the stain. Sometimes the tapping followed. 3 slow thumps. A pattern. A signal. Or a taunt. Mr. Whiskers remained his nocturnal post, a statue of fur and tension in the dark. But now, he'd often turn his head, just slightly, towards the bedroom door where I lay awake. Checking? Acknowledging the shared watch? His presence, once a comfort, now felt like the only thing holding back the creeping dread seeping through the plaster. I tried knocking on our side of the wall. One afternoon, while Mr. Whiskers was deep in his trance, I walked right up to the cold surface near the water stain and rapped my knuckles firmly. 3 times, mirroring the tap. Silence answered, heavy, swallowing the sound hole. I waited. A minute. Nothing. Mr. Whiskers didn't react to my knock, his focus absolute. But when I stepped back, defeated, he slowly, deliberate, turned his head. Looked at me. Not with warning this time. With something else, something infinitely sadder. Resignation? Pity? The look said, "You don't understand. You can't reach her that way." The despair that washed over me was a physical weight. Trapped. We were both trapped. Him by whatever he sensed, me by the terrible, creeping unknown, and the crumbling walls of my own grief. Mom's absence, the raw wound I'd run from, felt suddenly entangled with the silence next door. Another loss. Another unanswered question. Another door slammed shut. Bob the super arrived, finally, 3 days later. A burly man smelling of stale cigarettes and damp concrete. He barely grunted a hello, his eyes scanning the apartment with weary disinterest. The scratchy wall, he mumbled, already heading towards it. Mr. Whiskers, startled from his vigil, hissed a sharp, unexpected sound and bolted behind the television fortress. Feisty one, Bob observed, unperturbed. He pressed his ear to the cold plaster near the stain. Listened. Tapped it with a knuckle. Listened again. Old building, he pronounced, straightening up. Sounds travel funny. Probably pipes. Or Mrs. Gable's TV. But the tapping, the cold. I started. He waved a dismissive hand. Probably a gap in the lath somewhere. Common in these old firewalls. Seals go. He poked at the peeling seam near the baseboard. See? Paper's loose. Probably damp behind here from that old leak. He gestured vaguely at the water stain. Could be mice attracted to the damp. I'll set some traps. He pulled out a couple of cheap plastic snap traps from his tool belt. The sight of them, crude and lethal, made my stomach turn. But what about Mrs. Gable? Mr. Henderson said it's her wall. Maybe she's heard it too? Shouldn't we check with her? Bob's expression, already bored, closed off completely. He busied himself baiting the traps with rancid-smelling peanut butter. Mrs. Gable keeps to herself, he said, his voice flat. Real private. Doesn't answer the door much. Henderson handles her stuff. He placed the traps carefully, one near the loose seam, another closer to the radiator. These'll take care of any mice. Give it a few days. He left without another word, leaving the faint, greasy smell of peanut butter and the ominous presence of the traps in the room. The rational solution. It felt grotesquely inadequate. A band-aid on a hemorrhage. Mr. Whiskers didn't emerge from his fortress for hours. That night, the scritching was louder, more frantic. Scritch, 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 scritch. It sounded angry, driven. Then silence. A terrible, final silence. Followed by a sharp, metallic snap. Horribly in the stillness. From near the loose seam, my blood turned to ice. I knew that sound. I hated that sound. Mr. Whiskers, who had been sitting rigidly in the dark, let out a low, mournful wail. A sound I'd never heard from him before. Full of grief and horror. He didn't move towards the wall. He turned and bolted not to his fortress, but into the dark hallway, vanishing towards the bedroom, leaving me alone, with the silence, with the imagined horror behind the wall, with the sickening certainty that Bob's solution had just enacted something terrible, something small and desperate and now silenced. I couldn't breathe. The room spun. The cold from the wall seemed to seep into my lungs. Grief for Mom, fear for whatever had just died, guilt for bringing Mr. Whiskers here, guilt for calling Bob, guilt for existing in this suffocating nightmare. It crashed over me in a suffocating wave. I sank to my knees on the rug, right where Mr. Whiskers usually sat, staring blindly at the water stain. Tears, hot and shameful, blurred my vision. A sob tore from my throat, raw, ugly. Then another. I curled in on myself, forehead pressed to the rough fibers of the rug, the smell of dust and peanut butter and my own despair filling my nose. The weight of it all, the loss, the loneliness, the terrifying, inexplicable wrongness of this wall, it was too much. I was breaking, shattering, right there on the cold floor. A pressure, light, hesitant, against my curled back. Through the thin fabric of my t-shirt. Solid. I froze, mid-sub. The pressure shifted, settled. A soft weight. I lifted my head, blinking through tears. Mr. Whiskers was there. Not beside me. Not near me. On me. He had climbed onto my hunched back. His front paws planted firmly, carefully, just below my shoulder blades. His body, warm and surprisingly heavy, rested along my spine. I could feel the shallow rise and fall of his ribs, the softness of his belly fur, the slight tremor in his stiff old legs as he balanced. He wasn't purring. He was utterly still, just present, anchoring me. His warmth seeped through my shirt, a counterpoint to the cold dread radiating from the wall. He lowered his head, his chin resting gently, almost tentatively, on the top of my spine. His breath, warm and soft, stirred the hair at my nape. The gesture, so simple, so profoundly uncat-like, shattered me anew. But differently. This wasn't the breaking of despair, but the breaking of a dam. Years of held-back tears, for Mom, for the loneliness, for the fear, for the small, trapped thing behind the wall, poured out. I wept, great, heaving sobs that shook my whole body, shaking him too. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He held his ground, a warm, furry weight, a silent witness to the storm. His stillness, his unwavering presence on my trembling back, felt like forgiveness, like solidarity, like love in its purest, most wordless form. He knew. He knew the weight of silence, the terror of the unseen, the ache of loss. He'd been carrying it too, staring at the wall, listening to the scratches, feeling the cold. And now he was sharing the burden, taking some of my weight as I knelt, broken, before the source of our shared nightmare. The tears eventually subsided, leaving me hollowed out, exhausted, but strangely clean. The crushing weight was still there, but it felt distributed. I stayed very still, not wanting to disturb him. His warmth, the solid reality of him, was the only thing tethering me to the world. Slowly, tentative, I reached a hand back, not to touch him, but towards the wall. My fingers brushed the peeling seam near the baseboard, the one Bob had poked at. The wallpaper, brittle and damp, crumbled at my touch. A larger piece came away, revealing the rough, grayish plaster beneath, and a dark, narrow gap. A crack between the lath strips, no bigger than my pinky finger. It looked deep, and it smelled, not of mice or damp, but of something else. Defies, but also papery. Like the inside of a forgotten book or a box. Curiosity, sharp and reckless, cut through the numbness. Fueled by the warmth on my back, by Mr. Whisker's silent vigil, I pressed my eye to the crack, strained to see. Darkness. The chips. Not the expected studs and insulation of a wall cavity. This was hollow. A space. And within it, pressed flat against the backside of the plaster, was paper. Faded, yellowed, covered in dense, spidery handwriting. Not one sheet. Many. Stacked. Filling the narrow gap between the walls. A secret cache, hidden for who knew how long. Mr. Whiskers shifted slightly on my back, his weight settling. A soft, almost imperceptible rumble began in his chest. Not a purr of contentment, but something deeper, resonant. Acknowledgement. Yes, it seemed to vibrate against my spine. This is what I felt. This is what I heard. Not scratching claws, but shuffling paper? Reaching fingers? The thump, 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 someone trying to dislodge or retrieve what was hidden. The mystery wasn't vermin. It wasn't madness. It was words. Trapped. Silenced. Like the thing in the trap. Like my grief. Like Mrs. Gable. The wall hadn't been a boundary to fear, but a vault. Holding a story. And Mr. Whiskers, my old, battered cat, had been its guardian. Not staring at a threat, but bearing witness to a hidden cry. His vigil, his wariness, his fierce protectiveness, it hadn't been about danger to us. It had been about her. About the silence forced upon her. About the words screaming unheard from within the wall. The revelation didn't bring peace. It brought a different kind of storm, a maelstrom of empathy, horror, and a desperate, burning need to know. Who was Mrs. Gable? What were these pages? And why were they sealed away in the cold, dark space between our lives? The breaking point wasn't the snap of the trap. It was the crack in the plaster, the glimpse of yellowed paper, the understanding vibrating through the warm, furry weight on my back, that the silence next door wasn't emptiness. It was a scream, penned in spidery ink, hidden behind layers of time and plaster. And we, by accident, or perhaps by the quiet insistence of an old cat's stare, had finally heard it. The wall's secret was out. Not blown, but whispered through a crack no wider than a finger. And everything had changed. That tiny, ragged fissure in the plaster. It changed everything. And nothing. The wall still stood, cold, silent, holding its secrets tight. The water stain still bloomed like a bruise. But the unknown had shape now. Texture. Paper. A human hand pressed against the darkness from the other side. The horror of the trap's snap, the imagined small death, still hung thick in the air, mingling with the rancid peanut butter smell. But it was overshadowed, eclipsed, by the sheer, staggering weight of those hidden pages. Words. Trapped. Mr. Whiskers remained on my back, his warmth a grounding counterpoint to the chill radiating from the wall. His low rumble, that deep vibration against my spine, wasn't fear. It felt like confirmation. This is it. This is what I knew. His vigil hadn't been madness or senility. It had been witnessing, acknowledging the silent screams sealed in plaster. Slowly, carefully, I shifted. He stepped off, landing lightly despite his stiffness, and sat beside me on the rug. Not staring at the wall now, but at the crack. At the sliver of darkness, the edge of yellowed paper just visible. His tarnished penny eyes, wide, reflective, held a depth of understanding that humbled me. He'd known, not the specifics, but the essence, the profound, buried sadness. He carried that knowledge on for weeks, guarding it, until I was broken enough, open enough, to finally see. The guilt, sharp and fresh, cut through me. I dismissed him, written off his intensity as old age, weirdness, while he stood sentinel over a human tragedy. I reached out, tentatively, and let my fingers sink into the thick fur behind his crumpled ear. He didn't pull away. He leaned, just slightly, into the touch. A silent forgiveness. A shared burden. We sat there, on the cold floor, before the fractured wall, partners in the aftermath. The sprung trap had to be dealt with. The reality, grim and necessary. I couldn't leave it. Mr. Whiskers watched, silent, as I found thick gloves, a plastic bag. My hands shook. The cold from the wall seemed to seep into my bones. The trap was near the loose seam where the wallpaper had crumbled. The sight, a small, still form, was a punch to the gut. Not a monster. Just a creature, drawn by the damp, the smell, the promise of food in a barren landscape. Like us. Seeking warmth. Finding death. I whispered an apology, meaningless, as I lifted the trap, the tiny body stiffening within the plastic jaws. The sound of the bag sealing, the finality of it, echoed in the heavy silence. Mr. Whiskers turned his head away. A small, deliberate motion. Respect? Grief for a fellow creature caught in the machinery of human neglect? I placed the bag by the door, to take out later, feeling stained. Bob's solution. My call. Another layer of guilt added to the pile. I ripped up the other trap, and used, the peanut butter smell suddenly nauseating, and threw it away. No more. No more crude solutions for complex silences. The crack remained. A physical wound in the wall, revealing a metaphysical one. Those pages. Faded ink pressed against plaster. A story screaming to be heard. What to do? The moral quandary was immense. This wasn't my wall. Not really. It belonged to the building, to Mrs. Gable, to whoever had sealed these words away. To pry further, to extract the pages, felt like a profound violation. Like digging up a grave. But to leave them, trapped, screaming silently into the void, felt like complicity in the silence. Like turning away from Mr. Whiskers all over again. I knelt back down, eye level with the fissure. Mr. Whiskers settled beside me, his shoulder warm against my knee. He didn't stare intently this time. He watched me, his gaze steady, patient. Your choice, it seemed to say, but I'm here. I couldn't read the writing from here. Just the impression of dense lines, flowing script, the faint, powdery smell of old paper and dust. Who wrote them? Mrs. Gable? Someone else? Love letters filled with longing? Diary entries spilling despair? Angry accusations? Confessions? The possibilities swirled, dark and heavy. Why hide them here? Between walls? Was it secrecy? Protection? Or punishment? The tap, thump, thump, thump echoed in my memory. Not a signal. A plea. Let me out. Hear me. Could Mrs. Gable, the silent neighbor, be trying to reach them? Or were they hers, sealed away by someone else, and her taps were an echo of the trapped words, a desperate Morse code from the other side? The mystery deepened, even as part of it was revealed. The dread, the fear of the unknown, shifted. It became a profound, aching empathy, a shared human ache, transcending plaster and time. Mr. Whiskers had felt it first. He'd carried the weight of that silent cry. I felt it too. Bone dip. I made a choice. Not to rip open the wall. Not yet. But not to turn away either. I carefully, gently, using the tip of a butter knife, widened the crack just enough. Not to remove the pages, but to free a single corner. The paper was brittle, fragile as a dried leaf. It resisted, then yielded with a soft crickle. A tiny triangle, no bigger than a postage stamp, tore away in my fingers. Not enough to read any meaning. Just a fragment. A few disconnected words in faded blue ink. The light fades. So cold, wish you. And a signature, or part of one, looping and elegant even in miniature. A Beth. Elizabeth? The name hung in the air, delicate, haunting. I placed the tiny fragment, like a sacred relic, on the small table beside Mom's armchair. A tangible piece of the mystery. Acknowledged. Not solved, but seen. Mr. Whiskers hopped onto the footstool, his preferred spot now, and looked at the fragment. Then at me. A slow blink. His version of a nod. Life, in its stubborn way, moved forward. The gray October light softened, warmed slightly as November approached. The apartment, once a hollow cave of grief and unpacked boxes, began, tentatively, to become a home. A home. Not Mom's. Not a place I'd run to. But a shared space, forged in the strange alchemy of shared discovery, shared silence, shared grief. I unpacked. Properly. Filled the bookshelves. Hung pictures, including one of Mom, smiling, holding a much younger Mr. Whiskers, both looking impossibly vibrant. He'd watch me, sometimes from the footstool, sometimes from a patch of weak sunlight near the window. His fortress behind the television was abandoned. He'd taken to sleeping on the end of my bed, a warm, rumbling weight near my feet. His arthritis still bothered him. I saw it in the careful way he jumped down, but he moved with more ease. Less tension. The wariness around the wall, while not gone, had softened. He'd still avoid its perimeter, but the puffing fur, the low growl, had ceased. He'd sometimes sit near it, not staring fixedly, but contemplative, his gaze resting on the crack with a quiet acceptance. The secret was known. Not fully revealed, but acknowledged. His vigil had ended. Perhaps it was done. We settled into a new rhythm. Mornings began with warm shared glances, the comforting ritual of filling bowls. Work at the wobbly table felt less like numbness, more like purpose. The city sounds outside, sirens, traffic, distant shouts, became a backdrop, not an intrusion. Evenings were spent in Mom's armchair, Mr. Whiskers on the footstool, or sometimes, daringly, curled beside my hip. I'd read, or simply sit, my hand resting on his warm, patchy fur, feeling the rumble of his purr vibrate up my arm. A deep, resonant sound, different from the tense rumble of before. Contentment. The silence, when it fell, wasn't deafening anymore. It was companionable. We'd listen not just to the building's size, but to the quiet hum of existence. The wall was still cold. The crack, a tiny scar. The fragment of paper, a silent question mark on the side table. But the oppressive dread, the feeling of being watched by the unseen, had lifted, replaced by a profound, quiet understanding. Some silences are meant to be broken. Others, like the one holding Elizabeth's words, are meant to be respected. Witnessed. Until the time is right. Whatever is. Mr. Whiskers had taught me that. Not with words, but with his unwavering stare, his fierce protectiveness, his warm weight on my back as I shattered. He'd shown me how to hold space for the unseen ache, how to listen even to the loudest silences. One chilly afternoon, sunlight weak but persistent, I sat in the armchair, a book open but unread on my lap. Mr. Whiskers was on the footstool, bathed in the pale light, meticulously washing a paw. The apartment felt settled. Not just from the struggling radiator, but from something deeper. A sense of belonging, fragile but real. My gaze drifted, as it often did, to the wall, to the crack, to the water stain blooming beside it. It didn't look ominous anymore, just sad, holding its story. I remembered that first morning, the shock of seeing him, rigid, transfixed, staring at this same spot. The unease, the dismissal, how far we'd come. From detached coexistence, through shared terror, to this quiet solidarity. The fog of my grief hadn't vanished. Mom's absence was still a physical ache, a hollow space no warmth could completely fill. But it wasn't all-consuming anymore. It was integrated. A part of the landscape, like the wall, like the crack, like the tiny fragment of paper holding a woman's name. Loss was no longer a place I was trapped in. It was a layer, complex and aching, woven into the fabric of a life that was slowly moving forward. Mr. Whiskers finished his paw stretched, his back arching, stiff but fluid. He hopped down from the footstool, landing with a soft thud. Instead of heading to the kitchen or the window, he walked slowly, deliberately towards the wall. Not skirting it, not avoiding. He walked right up to the crack. Sniffed it once deeply. Then he did something extraordinary. He leaned forward, slowly, and pressed his forehead, right between his eyes, against the cold plaster. For a long, still moment. A benediction. An acknowledgement. The silent, I see you. I hear you. You are not forgotten. Then he turned, padded back towards me, jumped onto the armchair, not onto the footstool, but onto my lap. He circled once, carefully, his stiff legs finding purchase, and settled. A warm, heavy weight. His purr, that deep, resonant rumble, started up immediately, vibrating through my legs, up into my chest. He tucked his nicked tail close, rested his head on my thigh, and closed his tarnished penny eyes. Utterly at peace. The sentinel, finally, could rest. The wall hadn't given up all its secrets. Elizabeth's story remained trapped. Mrs. Gable, next door, remained a silent enigma. But the silence, the cold, the sense of impending wrongness, had transformed. It was no longer a threat. It was a shared truth, acknowledged, respected, held gently in the space between us, a space warmed now by trust, by hard-won companionship, and by the simple, profound purr of an old cat, finally home. The running had stopped. The hiding was over. We were here, together, witnesses to the seen and the unseen. And that, for now, was enough. Winter, not with a dramatic blizzard, but with a slow, insistent creep of frost on the window panes, and a deeper, more penetrating chill that seemed to seep up from the very bones of the building. The radiator groaned louder, fought harder, but the cold spot near the wall remained, a stubborn pocket of winter air refusing to yield. Yet, inside the apartment, something fundamental had shifted. A warmth had taken root, not just from the struggling heater, but from the quiet companionship that now filled the space, displacing the ghosts of grief and dread. Mr. Whiskers, my unlikely anchor, had become the steady heartbeat of this new life. His presence, the soft thud of his landing on the floor, the rhythmic rasp of his tongue grooming his patchy flank, the deep, resonant purr that vibrated through my lap in the evenings, these were the sounds of home now. The wall, with its crack and its water stain, was no longer the focal point of fear. It was a silent monument, a reminder of the unseen stories woven into the fabric of the world. Respected, acknowledged, but no longer consuming. The fragment of paper bearing the haunting words, "The light fades, so cold, wish you," and the elegant remained on the small table beside Mom's armchair. A tiny, yellowed island in the sea of ordinary life. I'd look at it, sometimes, while sipping tea, or while Mr. Whiskers dozed on my lap. Wonder about Elizabeth, about the hands that wrote those words, the heart that felt that cold, the voice silenced behind plaster. Was she Mrs. Gable? A ghost? A woman long gone? The mystery remained, but its edges had softened. It wasn't a scream anymore, just a whisper, carried on the drafts that still sometimes sighed from the crack. Life settled into a comfortable, if quiet, rhythm. Mornings were warm pâté and shared sunlight near the window. Mr. Whiskers tracking pigeons with lazy interest. Work at the wobbly table felt focused, purposeful. Evenings were the armchair, a book, or simply the shared silence, his purr a grounding counterpoint to the city's distant hum. He'd taken to sleeping curled against my side in bed, a warm, rumbling weight, his stiff legs occasionally stretching out in sleep, trusting. His arthritis still troubled him on cold days. I saw the careful calculation in his jumps, but he moved with a fluidity, a lightness I hadn't seen since Mom's house. He'd even started playing, tentatively. A crumpled paper ball, batted with surprising speed across the floor, followed by a stiff-legged pounce. The sight, this old warrior, engaging in kittenish abandon, never failed to make my heart squeeze. A small resurrection, a testament to the peace we'd carved out. One frigid December afternoon, the sky a hard, brittle blue outside, I decided to tackle the last of the unpacking. A single, stubborn box, labeled vaguely "Dad's Stuff, Storage" in Mom's looping script. It had sat in the corner, ignored, a relic from a past life I hadn't felt strong enough to revisit. Dad had been gone even longer than Mom, a quiet fade rather than a slammed door, but the grief was a different shape, older, dustier. Mr. Whiskers watched, perched on the back of the armchair, his tail tip flicking as I sliced the tape. The smell that wafted out was instantly familiar, a blend of old paper, pipe tobacco, long quit, and something faintly lemony like furniture polish. That smell. A wave of bittersweet nostalgia washed over me. Inside a jumble. Framed diplomas gathering dust. A chipped bowling trophy. A stack of old engineering journals. And at the bottom, wrapped in brittle, yellowed tissue paper, a small, rectangular wooden box. Dark walnut, polished smooth by time, with a simple brass clasp. I didn't recognize it. Lifting it out, the wood felt cool, substantial in my hands. Mr. Whiskers hopped down, landing silently beside me, his tarnished penny eyes fixed on the box. Intently, curiously, he sniffed the air, his nostrils flaring, then took a step closer, nudging the box gently with his nose. This, his posture seemed to say. This is important. My fingers fumbled slightly with the stiff brass clasp. It clicked open. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, wasn't jewelry or keepsakes. It was letters, tied together with a thin, frayed blue ribbon. Dozens of them. Envelopes, addressed in a dense, spidery handwriting that stopped my breath. A handwriting instantly, shockingly, familiar. I'd seen it pressed against plaster. Faded blue ink. Elegant loops. Elizabeth. The return address, blurred by time, but legible. Eleanor Gable, 17 Oak Lane, Briarwood. Gable. Mrs. Gable. My hands trembled as I lifted the top envelope. It wasn't sealed. Inside, a single sheet, covered in that same achingly familiar script. Dated May 12, 1967. My dearest Thomas, another week gone, and the silence in this big old house grows louder. The magnolias are blooming outside my window, a riot of pink against the green, but they only make me miss the lilacs we planted together at the cottage. Do you remember their scent? Like sugar and sunshine. Here, it's all polish and quiet. Too much quiet. Father insists it's for the best, this separation, this time to reflect. But reflection only shows me your face, your laugh, the way your hand felt in mine walking by the river. He says your prospects are uncertain, that I deserve stability. But Thomas, my stability was you. My light. Without you, the world feels so cold, even with the sun blazing. The light here fades differently, cruelly, reminding me of all we've lost. I wish you were here. I wish I could hear your voice, just once more, instead of the ticking of this dreadful clock. They watch me, Mother with her worried sighs. Father with his disapproval. They think hiding your letters will make me forget. They don't understand. Your words are etched on my heart, not paper. I found a crack near the fireplace in the library, behind the heavy drapes. I slipped my letters in there, one by one, hoping somehow, against reason, they'll find their way to you. Like messages in a bottle tossed into a vast, uncaring sea. Maybe the house itself will carry them? A foolish hope, but it's all I have. Yours always, through silence and separation. Your Elizabeth. The room tilted. The radiator clanked, a sharp, intrusive sound in the stunned silence. Elizabeth Gable. Writing to her Thomas. Letters hidden in a crack, in a wall, because her parents forbade the mash. Secrets sealed away, not out of malice, but out of stifling control, misguided protection. And decades later, an echo. A different wall, a different silence, but the same desperate act. Hiding words where they might be found, or might simply vanish, but at least they were out. Not trapped inside. The scritching, hipping that hadn't been vermin or madness. It was Mrs. Gable, the daughter, perhaps grown old in that same house of silence, still trying to reach the words, still trying to connect, to defy the silence imposed upon her. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd known they were there, behind the shared wall, a legacy of longing buried in the structure of her life, and her taps were a final, futile attempt to bridge the decades. To say, I am still here. The silence didn't win. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down my face. Not tears of grief this time, but of overwhelming, profound connection. A thread, thin but unbreakable, woven through time and plaster and human hearts. Elizabeth hiding her love letters. Mrs. Gable tapping on the wall, me kneeling broken before the crack. Mr. Whiskers standing sentinel over it all. We were all, in our own ways, trying to speak across chasms of loss, control, isolation. Trying to be heard. Trying to connect. The weight of it, the sheer, breathtaking symmetry, was almost too much. I looked down at Mr. Whiskers. He was sitting beside me, his shoulder pressed against my leg. He wasn't looking at the letters or the box. He was looking up at me. His old eyes, reflecting the weak winter light, held a depth of understanding that transcended species. He'd known. Not the specifics, never that. But he'd known the ache. The silent scream trapped in the walls, both literal and metaphorical. He'd felt it, carried it, and guided me, step by tentative step, not just to the crack in the plaster, but to this moment. To this box, buried in my own past, holding the key to the silence next door. His vigil, his fierce protectiveness, his insistence on that wall. It hadn't just been about Elizabeth's hidden words. It had been about all the unspoken things. Mom's absence, my grief, the trapped letters, the echoes of another woman's silenced love. He'd been the guardian of the unsaid. And his final gift wasn't solving the mystery. It was revealing the connection. Showing me that the ache I felt, the ache Elizabeth poured onto paper, the ache Mrs. Gable tapped into plaster, it wasn't isolated. It was universal. Human. His warm presence against my leg, the soft rumble starting deep in his chest, felt like a benediction. See? It seemed to hum. You are not alone. None of us are. The silences, they touch us all. But so does the reaching. I carefully retied the blue ribbon around Elizabeth's letters. Placed them back in the walnut box. The fragment from the wall, the tiny piece of Beth, I placed gently on top of the stack, like a missing piece returned. A circle almost closed. The gift wasn't just the revelation. It was the choice it presented. What to do with this knowledge? March next door? Confront a reclusive old woman about her mother's hidden heartbreak? Force a connection she might not want or be ready for? The thought felt invasive, cruel, like tearing open a wound that had scarred over. Mr. Whiskers nudged my hand with his head, a soft, insistent pressure. I looked into his eyes, the calm, patient, knowing pools of tarnished copper. He wasn't pushing me towards confrontation. He was reminding me of the quiet power of witness, of respect, of holding space. Elizabeth's words, her desperate act of love hidden in a wall, they had been found. Not by Thomas, not in time, but by us. They had been seen. Their echo, Mrs. Gable's taps, had been heard. That too perhaps was the gift. Not resolution, but acknowledgement. The silent scream, finally, received. The box, holding Elizabeth's longing, sat on the table beside the armchair now. Beside Mom's picture. Beside the small, torn fragment from the wall. A triptych of loss and love and the enduring human need to whisper into the void. I was here. I loved. I mattered. Mr. Whiskers jumped onto the footstool, then onto my lap, settling into his familiar circle. His purr, deep and resonant, vibrated against the box resting beside us, a living counterpoint to the silence held within the wood. He closed his eyes, utterly at peace. His job, his true purpose, was complete. He'd bridged the silence, not with words, but with unwavering presence. He'd guided me to understand that the deepest connections, the most profound gifts, often lie not in the answers we find, but in the simple, courageous act of listening to the spaces between. The wall next door remained silent, but the silence felt different, no longer empty, full of a story finally heard, full of a love that defied time and plaster, full of the warm, rumbling purr of an old cat who knew the language of the unsaid better than any of us. Winter deepened its hold. The city outside the windows became a monochrome etching, charcoal grays and bone whites, under skies the color of old dishwater. Frost painted intricate, fragile forests on the inside of the panes each morning, melting slowly as the weak sun climbed. The cold spot near Elizabeth's wall persisted, a stubborn pocket of the past refusing to fully thaw, but it no longer felt menacing. Just present. A reminder, like the walnut box, now a permanent fixture beside Mom's photograph on the small table, holding the weight of a love story sealed in paper and time. Mr. Whiskers. He moved slower now. The cold bit deeper into his old bones, making the jump onto the bed, or even the footstool, a careful, measured calculation. I'd lift him sometimes, feeling the lightness beneath his thick fur, the delicate bird-like structure of his ribs. He'd tolerate it with a soft grunt, then settle heavily, his purr rumbling, a sound that had become the bedrock of my days. His appetite, once revived by warm pal, waned again. He'd, delicately, then retreat off into a patch of weak sunlight on the rug near the wall, but not staring, just resting. His tarnished penny eyes, clouded slightly with age, held a profound calm. His vigil was long over. His message, delivered not in words, but in unwavering presence, in guiding me through the labyrinth of my own grief and into the heart of another's silent sorrow, had been received. He seemed content. Watching the pigeons with detached interest, sleeping long hours curled against my side, his purr a constant, comforting vibration in the quiet apartment. The connection forged in shared dread, solidified in shared discovery, had matured into a deep, silent understanding. We didn't need words. A hand resting on his flank, the slow blink of his eyes when I entered a room, the way he'd press his forehead gently against my knee, these were our language. A language built on witnessing the unseen, on holding space for the silent ache, on simply being there. The walnut box, Elizabeth's letters, they remained unopened after that first, shattering revelation. I didn't read another one. It felt intrusive, like eavesdropping on whispers meant only for Thomas, lost decades ago. Elizabeth had hidden them, a desperate act of love and defiance against the silence imposed upon her. Mrs. Gable, next door, had tapped, perhaps reaching for the echo of her mother's heartbreak, or simply trapped in her own inherited quiet. To force a connection now, to knock on 3BS door with the box, felt like another kind of violation. Some silences, some secrets, are meant to be kept, or released only when the heart is ready to receive them. Mr. Whiskers had taught me the power of quiet witness, of respecting the boundaries of another's pain. So, I bore witness to the box, to the fragment of paper beside it, the tiny Beth, to the silent wall next door. I held the space, acknowledged the love, the loss, the enduring echo trapped in plaster and time. That was the gift Elizabeth gave me. Not her story to dissect, but the profound understanding that grief, longing, the desperate need to be heard, these are threads woven through every human life. We are also whispering our truths into cracks, hoping against reason they will be found, understood. Mom, whispering her love in lavender hand cream and worn armchairs. Elizabeth, whispering hers onto paper hidden in walls. Whispering my grief into the fur of an old cat who listened with his whole being. Mr. Whiskers, whispering his vigilance, his knowing, in the language of stillness and purrs and a warm weight on a broken back. The silence isn't empty. It's full, resonant, with all the things we cannot or dare not say aloud. And sometimes, the greatest act of love is simply learning to listen to it. One morning, exceptionally cold, the radiator groaning in protest, I woke to a different silence. Not the companionable quiet of shared sleep, but an absence. A hollow space beside me in the bed. My heart stuttered, then plunged. I knew, even before I turned, before I saw him, curled on his favorite cushion on the floor, where the weak dawn light touched it first. Perfectly still, peaceful, his head resting gently on his paws, his eyes closed, as if in deep, untroubled sleep. The stiff legs finally relaxed. The watchful eyes finally at rest. The journey from Mom's moon to a shadow in a fortress, to a sentinel at a wall, to a warm, rumbling anchor in the storm, was complete. He'd delivered his message, bridged the silence, shown me how to see the unseen, hear the unsaid, hold space for the aching heart, whether it beat in my chest, behind plaster, or within the pages of a hidden letter. He taught me that love, in its purest form, often looks like quiet presence, like showing up, like bearing witness, even especially when words fail. The grief that washed over me was deep, a vast, quiet ocean. But it wasn't the drowning kind. It was the kind that holds you, the kind that honors the profound gift of having been loved and having loved so completely. It was threaded with gratitude, immense, aching gratitude for this battered old cat, this unlikely teacher who found me when I was lost and guided me home. I knelt beside him on the cold floor, my hand resting on his still flank, feeling the lingering warmth beneath his fur. The radiator clanked. Outside, a lone pigeon cooed. The apartment sighed. And near the wall, the cold spot remained. But the silence, it was full. Full of his purr echoing in memory. Full of Elizabeth's unsent words. Full of Mom's laughter. Full of the immense, quiet love of a creature who spoke the deepest truths without uttering a single human word. He hadn't just stared at a wall. He taught me how to see the world. With my heart. The snow fell softly the day I buried his ashes, beneath the bare branches of a young oak tree in a quiet corner of the park. A place where sunlight would touch the ground in spring. I placed the fragment of paper, the tiny Beth, with him. A whisper returned to the silence. A connection honored. The walnut box. Elizabeth's letters. I kept. A reminder. Not to pry, but to listen. To the spaces between. To the stories hidden in plain sight. To the silent aches beating in the hearts around me, and within my own. The apartment felt larger, quieter, without the soft thud of his landing, the rhythmic rasp of his tongue. But it didn't feel empty. I felt confused. With his presence. With the lessons learned in the shadow of a wall. I'd find myself pausing, listening. Not just for the building's sounds, but for the quieter hum beneath. The hum of human stories, whispered, hidden, yearning to be heard. I started volunteering at the local shelter. Not seeking another cat, not yet, but drawn to the quiet ones. The old ones, curled in the backs of cages, eyes holding depths of unspoken history. The shy ones, watching the world with wary hope. I'd sit with them, not forcing interaction, just being present, holding space, listening to their silence, offering the warmth of witness, just as he had offered it to me. It was his final gift, rippling outward, teaching me to extend the quiet language of presence, of seeing the unseen, to others who needed it, the way he had done for me, for Elizabeth, for the silent ache echoing through the plaster. Spring came eventually, tentative, fragile, green shoots pushing through cold earth, sunlight strengthening, warming the worn wood of Mom's armchair. One mild afternoon, I sat there, not reading, just being, listening. The window was open a crack, letting in the sounds of the city waking from winter, and the faint, sweet scent of something blooming. Hyacinths, maybe. My gaze drifted, as it always did, to the wall. To the crack, now carefully patched but still visible as a faint line, a scar. To the water stain, faded slightly. And to the walnut box beside Mom's picture. Silent, holding its story. A story of love, loss, and the enduring courage it takes to whisper into the void. A story that, thanks to a battered old cat with tarnished penny eyes, would never truly be lost. It had been heard. It had been held. The silence hadn't won. Whispered onto paper, tapped onto plaster, purred into the dark, endures, defines its way. Across decades, through walls, into the heart. If you know how to listen, Mr. Whiskers taught me that. The greatest story he ever told wasn't about a wall. It was about the boundless, quiet, extraordinary power of simply being there and listening with everything you are. The silence holds more stories than you know. What walls are whispering around you? If this journey moved you, if you've ever felt seen by a quiet companion, share this story. Tag someone who understands the language of purrs and presence. Subscribe for more tales that find the extraordinary hidden in ordinary hearts. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that might just change how you listen to the world. Your comment feeds our storytelling heart. Tell us below, what's the greatest lesson an animal ever taught you? And share, because sometimes, the quietest stories shout the loudest truths. Until the next story finds you, listen.